Shalom. How do we view God? And how does He view us? That's one of the secrets of this week's Torah portion. This week we are reading Parashat Vayera. The portion begins with the words, "And He," meaning God, "appeared to him," Avraham, "in the plains of Mamre." God appeared to Avraham. According to our sages, God was actually paying a visit because Avraham was recuperating from the operation of his circumcision, and visiting the sick as an important principle. So they were apparently talking together, but that's between the lines because the conversation is not recorded. The main thing is these opening words, "And He appeared." That's the name of the parsha, Vayera. Then Avraham lifts up his eyes and sees three men. Seeing, appearing, looking, aspects of vision seem to be a major theme in our parsha, which is called "And He appeared." Lots of seeing in this Torah portion, and actually the major events in the parsha also involve seeing. For example, lots of seeing regarding Sodom and the destruction of Sodom. Verse 16, "And the men arose from there, and they gazed upon Sodom, and Avraham went with them to escort them. And the Lord said, Since the cry of Sodom and Moriah has become great, and since their sin has become very grave, I will now descend and see whether according to her cry, which has come to me, they have done. I will wreak destruction upon them, and if not, I will know." And then, of course, most famously, we read in verse 17, "And when it came to pass, when they took them outside, that He said, Flee for your life, do not look behind you, and do not stand in the entire plain. Flee to the mountain, lest you perish." And of course, in verse 26 we read, "And his wife looked from behind him, and she became a pillar of salt." Yep. And even when it comes to the problems of Hagar and Ishmael, we read in verse 9, "And Sarah saw the son of Hagar the Egyptian, whom she had borne to Avraham, making merry." As far as Hagar is concerned, we read, "God opened her eyes, and she saw a well of water, and she went and filled the pouch with water and gave the lad to drink." What a life Avraham leads. He is such a central and important archetype, and there is so much for us to learn from him and about him for our own service of God, and there is so much about him packed into only 3 Torah portions. Our sages teach that Avraham was subjected to and passed with flying colors 10 tests of faith. Number 1, he had to hide for 13 years because Nimrod, a wicked king, sought to kill him. Number 2, Nimrod threw Avraham into a fiery furnace. Number 3, God commanded Avraham to leave his family and his homeland and his father's house and everything behind. Number 4, as soon as he arrives in the land of Canaan, following God's directive, a famine forced him to leave and to go to Egypt. Number 5, Sarah was taken by Pharaoh in Egypt. Number 6, Avraham had to go off to war to rescue his nephew Lot. Number 7, God tells him that his descendants will suffer under 4 kingdoms. Number 8, God commands Avraham to circumcise himself and his son Ishmael. Number 9, God commands him to banish Hagar and Ishmael. Number 10, the ultimate test, God commands Avraham to offer his son Isaac on the altar. This 10th and final test is known as the Akedah, Akedat Yitzchak, literally the binding of Isaac. This event went against everything that Avraham knew and stood for. He was teaching the whole world that HaShem, that this one God who is the Creator, who is the sum total of reality, to whom we are all responsible and subservient, who brought forth all of creation from nothing, he was teaching everyone that contrary to the mindset and to the custom of the pagans, the idolaters of that time, God abhors human sacrifice. It's the furthest thing from the truth. Now all of a sudden Avraham found himself in a real predicament where he had to actually fulfill God's will, and this is absolutely the opposite of what he understood God to be. And the incidents, and that's only one aspect of why this event is so central in the life of Avraham and in the life of the Jewish people. the event of the binding of Isaac begins and ends with seeing. We read in chapter 22 and verse 4, on the third day, Avraham lifted up his eyes and saw the place from afar, referring to the Temple Mount, Mount Moriah. The conclusion of the test we read in verse 13, and Avraham lifted up his eyes and saw, and lo, there was a ram. And after that it was caught in a tree by its horns, and Avraham went and took the ram and offered it up as a burnt offering instead of his son. But then, most importantly of all, it all comes together in the most wondrous way, because in verse 14 we read, and Avraham named that place, the Lord will see, as it is said to this day, on the mountain the Lord will be seen. HaShem Yireh. Avraham called the name of that site HaShem Yireh. As it is said, on this day, on the mountain HaShem will be seen. First of all, according to our sages, originally this place was called Shalem, which is a derivative of both wholeness and peace. Named Shalem by none other than Shem, the son of Noah, who we are taught was none other than Melchizedek, the king of Jerusalem. But after the incident of the binding of Isaac, Avraham renamed the place. He named it Yireh, meaning he will be seen, but in future tense. Interesting. But also the word is associated with fear. Not just fear, but reverence, awe. So according to the Midrash, God took both of these names and synthesized them both together, made a contraction, and called it Yerushalayim, Jerusalem, also denoting the perfection, the completeness, the wholeness, shalem, of yireh, of fear. That Jerusalem, something about it, is the rectification, the perfection of the attribute of fear of heaven, the most important attribute of all. Now, interestingly, some commentators point out a connection between this idea of the name of the mountain HaShem will be seen, and the commandment of the thrice yearly pilgrimage to the Holy Temple, which is also a matter of being seen. Because this time, though, it's about Israel being seen by God. So, is there reciprocal seeing? Because we are commanded, three distinct verses come to mind in the Torah, Exodus 23:17. 3 times a year shall all your men be seen before the Lord HaShem. Exodus 34:23, same thing. Deuteronomy 16:16, 3 times a year, all your men should be seen before HaShem your God in the place that He will choose. On the festival of Matzot, on the festival of Shavuot, and on the festival of Sukkot. So the Temple Mount, by its very essence, as reflected in its name, in the aspect of the identity that Avraham perceived, is about a revelation of godliness. This is the place. It's about God being seen there. When is He seen there? In the Holy Temple? Perhaps when 3 times a year we are to be seen there by God? Is that when He can also be seen? Actually, He is always gazing upon it. The verse in Deuteronomy 11:12 that reads, a land that the Lord your God looks after, the eyes of the Lord your God are always upon it from the beginning of the year to year's end, which of course is speaking about the entire Eretz Israel, the entire land of Israel. It's known and understood that this verse is primarily speaking about the place of the Holy Temple, which is the heart, the concentration, center of the land of Israel, the soul of the land. And He can always be seen there. But how do we view God? What happens at the Temple Mount is some sort of revelation of HaShem Yireh, the perfection of fear, of God being seen there. But how do people view Him? Certainly the way a person views God must have an influence on behavior. Is it connected with how we view the Temple Mount? The place that He declares to be the seat of his honor and the primary place of the revelation of his presence in this world? Now, the forefathers, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, had an ongoing process wherein their lives were refining the conception of the Temple Mount for all generations. You have this very enigmatic teaching about the Har, the Sadeh, and the Bayit, the mountain, the field, and the house, that Avraham, and this is based on the verses in the Torah, Avraham's relationship with the Temple Mount was through the aspect of his perceiving it as a mountain, right? In the mountain, HaShem will be seen. And a mountain, of course, is something which is removed more from society, foreboding. It is not so easy to live there. It's not civilized. Yitzchak, we will be learning, Isaac, went out to meditate in the field. And as Jacob said, behold, the fragrance of my son is like the fragrance of a field blessed by God. It's talking about the Temple Mount in the form of a field which is already cultivated and which is already being used by people, which is closer to the needs of a person. The ultimate level of perception of the temple and the Temple Mount is that which was perceived by the forefather Jacob, who said, this is none other, in the beginning of Parashat Vayera, in his dream, he said, this is when he woke up, this is none other than the house of God, and this is the gateway to heaven. And Prophet Isaiah tells us that in the future, all people are going to say, come, let us come up to the house of the God of Jacob. Of course, that's a house of prayer for all people. Ironically, one of the major news stories in Israel these days that's captivating everyone's attention has to do with seeing on the Temple Mount, the place in which HaShem will be seen. And a much touted deal, details of which still lack clarity, a deal brokered by the U.S. Secretary of State involving Prime Minister Netanyahu and Jordan's King Abdullah. It was agreed that cameras will be installed on the Temple Mount to forestall incitement, ostensibly to enforce the undemocratic, discriminatory status quo, according to which only Muslims are allowed to pray on the Temple Mounts, but not Jews, because the Muslims, who de facto control the Temple Mount, the place Avraham called, on the mountain HaShem will be seen, the perfection of the attribute of the fear of heaven. The Muslims do not want to see anyone at all that is not a Muslim pray on the Temple Mount. So how do they see God in this place? Or how do they see God at all, for that matter? You know, God don't need no camera on the Temple Mount to see us, and we don't need one to see him. Nor do we need any microscope or any amount of videotape or recording devices to know exactly what is going on here at the Temple Mount. Those who have usurped control of the holiest place on earth seek to obscure God's presence, the presence of HaShem that will be seen in this mountain, the place known as the mountain HaShem will be seen. They are doing their darndest to make sure he can't be seen. Of course, they also claim that the mosque was created by angels during the 6 days of creation at the time of Adam. They also claim that there never was a holy temple, and they also claim that Abraham bound Ishmael and not Isaac. The Temple Mount is a vision thing, and believing is seeing. As King David so aptly stated in Psalm 27, had I not believed that I would see the goodness of HaShem in the land of life, which I actually translate as, believing is seeing. The land of life is the mountain where HaShem will be seen, the perfection of fear of heaven and reverence, the place that Israel believes will once again become a house of prayer for all nations.